Hey guys, it's 007 here, and today we're going to be talking about the assessment of the F-100D Super Sabre and the MiG-19. Now, I figured I could probably talk about these two aircraft relatively fast and all that, and I'm going to basically give myself a little timer off screen here so I know what I'm looking at time-wise, because obviously it's usually a major issue is sometimes I'll just go off a little bit. I just want to make sure I'm staying on the ball. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend about, let's say, 3 minutes each on both these aircraft and talk about them. And ultimately what I'm going to do with the 3 minutes is I'm going to talk about them individually, their strengths, and ultimately I think their weaknesses, and then I'm going to talk about some of the comparisons that you can do between the two aircraft a little bit afterwards. But first of all, we're going to start with the F-100. That was the first aircraft I acquired. We'll go ahead and get the timer going. So basically, the F-100, when I got this aircraft, it was basically seen as the fastest aircraft in the game for the fact that it had a higher top speed than all the other aircraft in the game. It is capable, I believe, fully upgraded about... I've seen it in combat go about as far as Mach 1.08. That's as fast as I've taken it in combat. And it's a very fast aircraft. It's really fun to fly. Now, from what I've seen from watching other people play it, and myself flying it, I found that it does not like to play the same old player-based style of the F-86 Sabres. I see people, they want to fly it that way, and it's very interesting, because ultimately you see these people flying on the deck with the F-100, and the interesting thing about these aircraft as history progressed is these aircraft started finding speed. People want raw speed at low altitude because they think the air is better for the engines to breathe. But the airframes themselves perform better at higher altitudes because they have less resistance. Oxygen to the engine is no longer really a problem. Yes, it is a continued struggle for the designer to try and meet that design and the conditions of the environment. But the F-100 can build its energy up a little bit better at higher altitude. The air resistance there is a lot better for this thing to accelerate. Now, I've taken it, and now I'll talk about the speed with the endurance of the aircraft. Now, one of the biggest issues with these aircraft is obviously their endurance. The three rank 6s, especially about them in general, they struggle much with their fuel time. They have a very big endurance problem. Now, the F-100 can beat this with its larger fuel tanks. And I'm going to talk about this stuff hopefully later on in the rank 6 video. Excuse me, guys. The rank 6 video that discusses about these aircraft, about the next generation of aircraft following these right here, and what the game's going to basically need in advancing them. Now, the F-100, its larger fuel tanks provide it the opportunity to fight an endurance fight. Now, people talked about, what were the advantages of this aircraft versus the MiG-19. Now, people said because of the fuel tanks and its speed, it would be an endurance fight. It would be like the P-51 versus the Zero, being the MiG-19 being the Zero. And to a degree, they can be somewhat right, but I don't believe that's the entire picture, and I don't think you can make that as a full conclusion of this aircraft's ability to operate. And additionally, I'm not going to talk about the payloads of these aircraft too much. It's primarily going to be their offensive systems when it comes to air-to-air combat. Now, with the F-100 being in mind, I've found that going in a 20 to 30 degree climb, and even sometimes 35 degrees, right off the bat, right off takeoff, not even building up airspeed, just literally taking it off the airstrip and taking it off to the side, and just climb 25 to 35 degrees up in the sky. I found that's been a pretty effective way of climbing. I usually do 25 degrees, sometimes I'll do 30 degrees. And what I'll do is I'll do a 30-minute fuel time with that. And the reason why I do a 30-minute fuel time with that is purely down to the fact that it gives me the ability to take off, get to altitude about 6,000, about 4 to 6,000 meters, and I'll have about 25 minutes of the fuel tank left, and that will be plenty of time for me to afterburn around. Roughly when I get to about 7 to 5 minutes left of fuel time, I'm going to basically let it get back to the airspace and land it. That's roughly what I do for what I have. Now, obviously, this thing is very good with its weapons. It has the largest amount of ammunition for the 20 mils in comparison to its predecessor, the F-2 Sabre. Did very well there. The guns and the missiles are very nice. You have a lot of flexibility engaging your opponent. You can sit there and rattle shots off and try and slow your opponent down. and try and beat him in the speed fight. The pitch capacity of the aircraft is very, very impressive as well, I must say. Initial speed tossing, it can basically get really good pitch with its elevators in the back. Very impressive in that regard. It has a lot more authority and throw when it comes to comparing it to the F-86 Sabres. You have a lot more ability to do gunfights, and the velocity of the guns is a lot better than the Hunter. Not as good as the F-2 in my opinion. I think the F-2's guns have some velocity that just can't be met by the guns that are currently on this plane. Even though these things don't overheat, which is a very nice plus, and they have way more ammo. So weapons-wise, I think the F-100 is very good, but I wouldn't say it's ridiculous. Now, continuing even further than that, I'd probably say the high-speed combat of this thing, going in, getting altitude, going in high speed, doing a gunfight, doing a missile shot, do a few missile shots, is basically the way to play this thing. It doesn't really go beyond that. Now, roughly, this thing cannot slow down. If you slow this thing down beneath about 600 to 700, you're basically making yourself a sitting duck for other aircraft. You gotta, if you're ever going to do that, make sure you have allies in the area ready to take on the enemy that's right there next to you when you're doing it. You can't do it alone, and that's ultimately what I have to say about this aircraft, summing it up. It can't fight alone. If you want to dominate a game, you can do it. Some people have done it. I've done it myself, and I'm planning on putting some replays up that I've done of the aircraft basically solo flying. And, I mean, not so much solo flying, but flying in with a solo, not communicating with anyone else, primarily just engaging. But let's leave it at that with the F-100. I think overall it's a good aircraft. I think people should get it. Now, let's move on to the MiG-19. Now, the MiG-19, I think this aircraft is very, very good. And people really like to hit this thing for the lack of ammunition and the fuel time it has. Now, I think the fuel time is an issue. But as I found with the F-100, the more you upgrade the aircraft, the easier it is to reach the speeds and the performance that you need to get to your position. And improving that time and that fuel consumption, you improve the endurance, and the aircraft overall becomes better. Now, I found that even stock with just about the missiles and the compressor blade, I almost have the fuselage repair. I'm not very much upgraded on this versus the F-100, but I've been flying the F-100 a lot more because I wanted to upgrade it and basically get it to a decent position. Now, the MiG-19... The MiG-19, I found, even stock, it's a very, very nice aircraft to fly. Yes, it's not as fast as the F-100, but the acceleration is what really brings it apart. Now, obviously, it can only accelerate so long with its afterburner and fuel consumption being the issue. People like to hit the payloads, like I said, the weapons for this thing, and give it a hard time. They say the 30 mils are really bad. In my opinion, I think the 30 mils are great. Only 1 or 2 30 mils will bring down an aircraft. It's very, very interesting. Now, you have to be good with your shots, and I gotta say, the best plane, if you're really struggling with this aircraft, trying to understand how to fly it and operate it, the perfect plane I have in mind for you training-wise is the Kika. This is the best trainer you could possibly fly in the game. It basically runs the same ammo count, roughly. The guns are a little bit different in their velocity and their rate of fire. But ultimately, the conservation of the ammo is what's key here. That's what is key in flying the Kika. I love this plane. I think this is the best aircraft in the jets for Japan. I want to say BR for BR, but roughly for its 6.7, 7.0 region, I think it's a really good aircraft. I think I'd fly this over a 262 any day, just because of what it's done and what I've seen it do. But I'm not talking about the Kika. I'm trying to focus on the fact that the MiG-19, there are ways to like and love this aircraft. Now, this thing does things that the MiG-17 can't do in some regards. For instance, it can carry air-to-air missiles. That's just one off the bat. But this aircraft can accelerate and keep itself in the game at high speed with the all-moving tail. The all-moving tail is what the Soviet Air Forces lacked this entire time. The ability to have the control authority at that airspeed is very key, and it's very nice. One thing I must say, though, that's not really comparable to it in the MiG-17 is the fact that it lacks the flight worthiness. If this thing gets hit, it usually is pretty much kind of screwed compared to the MiG-15s and 17s. MiG-15s and 17s are really tough aircraft. This thing was the Soviets' attempt to try and match the performance and try and extend the speed and acceleration and climb performance, that they wanted to match that and exceed that of the Americans, and that's understandable. And to be honest, people aren't really supposed to be going around designing aircraft to expect them to fight a tank war when they should be fighting like an aircraft, fast, agile, and everything like that. I think the aircraft's still very good. I really do like it. I believe that this aircraft shouldn't be given as much hatred as it is. And ultimately, if I was asked to compare the two aircraft, I'd probably say, well, let's extend the realm of the spectrum here from what we're talking about. So we're basically, from what I would initially be talking about, is these aircraft solo fighting against each other. If that were the case, I would think that the MiG-19 is better when it comes to a single man and his aircraft fighting. I think that the MiG-19 would be the better aircraft. Now, I say that because this thing can build its energy up a lot quicker, and it can easily find itself at better altitudes. Now, it does lack the fuel to do an endurance fight, like I said earlier, comparing it to the F-100. But this aircraft really does do something quite better than that. And it has the ability to keep itself in the game and put its enemy off edge. And ultimately, I'd say as a solo aircraft, I think I'd like to fly this thing if I was flying solo. Now, the F-100 is a lot better if you have a 4-man or 2-man, or I mean, I haven't really seen many 3-man flights, but I've seen it where 4 and 2-man flights, this thing can really dominate a game. If they're coordinated and supporting each other, like the tactics, and I talked about this in some YouTube comments. This aircraft supported and supporting is instrumental to success. And it's interesting because I've talked with my father a lot about this stuff because, you know, being retired Air Force, although he never flew these aircraft, you know, he talked to the people that flew them, and he's seen some of the training and tactics that, you know, were employed in his basic instructionals when it came to flying his aircraft. He talked about the formations and a lot of the roles of the wingmanship and everything being key in their elements. And the American Air Force reliably goes off that belief, and a lot of Air Forces do go off that belief that numbers will win you the battle. And strategic placement and supporting positions ultimately decide who wins and who doesn't come home tonight. And that ultimately, I think, sums up the F-100 perfectly. This is a multi-ship plane. It's designed to be flown in a group. And when it does that, I don't think you can really stop them. And I think if a group of MiG-19s were going up against a group of F-100s, I think that ammunition that they have and that speed that they can maintain, along with the endurance factor, that's key too. They can run the MiG-19s out of the fight. And ultimately, I think that really sums it up, though, between these two aircraft. Now, I don't think the missiles are better than each other. I think the fact that the F-100 carries more missiles is more beneficial to it. It can be a little bit more trigger-happy. Although I can't recommend firing the missiles off willy-nilly. It's just good. I mean, you have to be smart about what you do with these missiles. Now, I can see people, and I've done it myself, where I've used the missiles to bring my opponent closer to me. Make them maneuver, bleed their speed, get closer, and usually the missiles are being seen as a supporting role, a supporting role to the guns for the aircraft. That's ultimately what I wanted to say in that regard. I think a combo flight of the MiG-19s and F-100s, obviously that can happen now, considering we have like more mixed battles for aerialistic. A MiG-19 and an F-100 working together can be pretty unique, but I don't think you can really ignite the potential like you would if it was a free 2 or 4-man flight of F-100s. It's really interesting, and one of the things that people usually like to I've seen a lot over the holidays, because obviously I wasn't playing the game much. I was, you know, spending time with family, and there are times when I had off moments I could, you know, do stuff like watch what other people are doing, and I feel like the community of YouTube has been getting it wrong. They've been in this full-on war against one or the other aircraft, and obviously they've been attacking the Javelin a lot, and I hope to talk about the Javelin here in a bit once I start flying it, but I've seen the experience of it flying. But talking about the F-100D being better than the MiG-19 or the MiG-19 being better, I don't think that's quite right. I think if you were sitting there talking about the MiG-17 and the F-86 F2, or the CL-13, and comparing them to each other, I just don't think that's right, because it's two different doctrines of flying, and you're trying to say, based on this, you know, this one should win. And a lot of people have their preferences, and they do very well by their preferences, and obviously they've seen the lens of aviation in that regard and perspective, but in my opinion, I think both the aircraft are equally matched. And I think I can see why they wanted to make the MiG-19 10.0 versus 9.7, and they just wanted to make it so that way drawdown fights would occur. And I'm hoping eventually that we see a move by Gaijin to create 8.7 as a BR again for rank 6, or sorry, rank 5, my bad, rank 5. And I honestly hope that would probably benefit the game a lot. And I can see why they would do that, purely down to the fact that I think they think the MiG-19's acceleration was the key aspect in making it 10.0 over the F-100. And to be honest with you, though, I think that's just done the way it is. Although I think it's very capable for anyone to engage these aircraft. Just given the or not the perspective, but the position and the proper execution, obviously you can take down the aircraft. But I don't think the F-100 or the MiG-19 are better than each other. I think they're both equal aircraft, and they should be seen as equals. And even though the BR does not dictate that, or the armaments don't dictate that, the conditions that the aircraft live in and their abilities very much will tell the story I'm saying right now. But that's all I've got to say about these two aircraft. I know ran over time a little bit. This is my first time ever doing that, but I think that best sums it up between these aircraft. I think they're both equally matched aircraft. I just think F-100s do better in groups, and I think the MiG-19s are probably better, and they have a better standing when it comes to solo flying in their ability to fight. But that's all I've got to say. I'm 007. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you guys later.